Welcome to the theEWpodcast. I'm your host, Eric White. In this episode, I chat with Alvaro Fernandez. Alvaro is the CEO of SharpBrains, which is an independent market research firm tracking applied neuroscience. And he's co-author of the book, The SharpBrains Guide to Brain Fitness. You can think of SharpBrains and Alvaro's work as a bridge between the scientific community and the general public. In this episode, Alvaro shares insights from his work with SharpBrains relating to brain health and fitness. We talk about the importance of being proactive with brain fitness, the role of exercise, diet, and training in brain health, the effects of video games on brain fitness, and much more. Alvaro shared a ton of useful resources during this conversation, and I've done my best to provide links to each of them in the show notes for this episode. Now, I haven't personally gotten into the biofeedback tools yet that he mentions here in this episode, but it is something I plan on doing, probably later this year. I can personally testify to the game Brain HQ that we talk about here in this episode. It's been a fun and relatively easy way to just sharpen processing speed as part of my daily routine. And when I say easy, I mean easy to implement. The games can be quite challenging. So anyway, I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Here is my discussion with Alvaro Fernandez. Okay, I'm here with Alvaro Fernandez. Thank you very much for joining me today, Alvaro.
A pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so before meeting, you recommended me to read your book, The SharpBrains Guide to Brain Fitness.
I'm sure I'm not the first author who has recommended you to do that, correct?
No, I'm glad you did. I think it's going to make our conversation more lively. And I also, as a compliment to you, I enjoyed the book very much. I thought the information was presented in a very accessible way. I don't have any schooling or background in this topic. So sometimes things can go over my head, but I found myself fully engaged in the book and able to understand. So that's as a compliment to you, but also to the listeners. If you are interested, I promise you will be able to keep up. So,
excellent. And just to clarify, and the book is one of the many things we do. You wanted also to talk about technology and the future of neuroscience and new technology, but I think the book provides a great context. I think when people often go to the technology piece first, without understanding the wider context and what is going on, then they get lost very quickly. So I think the book provides a great foundation for a whole new field in which many things are changing and where many people, frankly, should know much more about our brains and our minds. We all have brains, we all have minds, so we should know at least the basics, and that would be the first step. And then we can talk technology, we can talk business, we can talk industry, we can talk. So I'm all.
Yeah. And
your lead.
Yeah. And that was something else I enjoyed about the book was just how it was broken up into very clear chapters. Each one had a specific purpose, something to teach you very specifically about the brain and about our relation to it. And so I think we'll just get going. But to get us started here, can you just give a little background about yourself, how you came to be interested in the brain, and how you started the organization SharpBrains?
Super. So that's a long story, but to summarize it. And by the way, I've heard the podcast you heard with Barbara. So I like this is a very open conversation. So I know you're going to take it in any way, so we can go deeper into any topic you want. But just to summarize, so I'm from Bilbao in the Basque Country in the north of Spain. And I was raised there. All my family, even to this day, lives there. I major in economics, so I am quite quantitative, in a sense, person. Then worked in consulting and publishing for a few years in Madrid, Lisbon, and Barcelona. Then came to the US to do a master's in Stanford. That's what made me cross the Atlantic.
Okay.
And first idea was to study business. I did an MBA. But since I was much younger, I love learning. My addiction is learning. And so once I was in Stanford, I realized they have a dual degree with education. which I could do both degrees at the same time. And I did that, focus on adult learning, because I wanted to learn better about myself and how to learn better and faster. And also by that age, I had helped launch an online bookstore in Europe where I, at a very young age, maybe I was 25, was responsible for maybe 20, 25 people. And I wanted to help them learn. So in a sense, being their leader, I saw it as being their teacher, like how I learn, how I help them learn. So it was super interesting in adult learning. When I left Stanford, I worked in a couple of startups focused on distance learning, which is now becoming a very hot area given COVID and lockdowns. But the first startup, distance learning, was for corporations, how they can train their employees and their distributors worldwide. Another one was focused on children, how to do better formative assessments to identify their strengths, their weaknesses, and how to improve teaching based on that. But in parallel, I was reading more and more about neuroscience, just from a personal interest. And I came across, let's say, 3 key books that made me realize, wow, there's a huge opportunity and a huge need here. The first book is titled A User's Guide to the Brain by John Ratey, who later wrote a book called Spark that many people have heard of. It's about the benefit of physical exercise on the brain. But that previous book, The User's Guide to the Brain, is fascinating. And I recommend everyone read it because it gives you a great view into perception, mind, cognition. And in the end, he speculates, well, given everything we know about the brain and this new thing called neuroplasticity, I can envision how in the future we will have brain gyms, or we will have places to help us improve our strengths, deal with our weaknesses. So I just thought, well, that was interesting. A few months later, I read another book called Wisdom's Paradox by Elhonon Goldberg, who basically is a well-known neuroscientist focused on the frontal lobe of the brain and the prefrontal cortex. And both that book, The Wisdom Paradox, and through that, I read another previous book of him called The Executive Brain. He goes way deeper into 2 key concepts. One, lifelong neuroplasticity, and the idea that, the brain is not fixed. When we are 20 or 25, it's always flexible, depends on what we do with it. And also the concept of cognitive reserve, meaning the more stimulating lives we lead, the more we can delay potential problems. We cannot prevent them for sure, but we can delay the onset and we can reduce the probability. And I thought, wow, if those 2 things are true, and then earlier, this idea of John Ratey of a brain gym, there should be much more emphasis on trying to understand all the science, all the technology, and put it all together so that people can benefit from that. I didn't see it as a sprint. I saw it as a marathon. It was a very significant change in mindset from education being a way to transfer content to a way to develop capacities, develop cognitive, executive, emotional capacities. Seeing healthcare from just being neck down to being a lot neck up. And then you talk of brain health, not only think about pharma and drugs are going to solve our problems, but there's many natural mechanisms in the brain that we can harness to deal with them and either replace or complement or augment pharma. So we're pretty agnostic. We are like, whatever works. It is. And the same with mental health and the same with corporate wellness. So companies invest a lot of money in talking about stress, for example, to their employees, but typically they don't give them the tools or the knowledge to know how to self-manage, how to regulate emotions and stress. So I thought, wow, this is fascinating. And I was much more inspired than by my day job in that point. I was involved in more like a political context of negotiating budgets, fighting with the board, and all these kind of business stuff. So I thought, wow, this is like land of opportunity. What can I do? And then the first thing I did was to write a letter that I FedExed to Elhonon Goldberg, the author of those 2 books I mentioned, saying, hey, I would like to discuss the books, what they mean, what they represent, and maybe collaborate in some ways. So he responded. We started talking. And after a few months, we decided to launch SharpBrains. He, being a scientist and a pretty action-oriented guy, he wanted to develop a new game. Like, I know you have heard of Positive Science, Brain HQ, or Kawashima in Japan, the brain training, brain age game. But I thought there was already too many games, too many technologies. What was missing was the independent resource to help put all of those new tools together and to help users and investors and insurance companies learn more about these innovations and how to adopt them. So after a while, we decided that's what SharpBrains would come to be. And that was probably 14 or 15 years ago. So we must be close to our 15-year anniversary. So most of what we have been doing since has been to track everything that is pretty applied neuroscience. So we would not track something very basic, something at the molecular level. We track anything that is already done, randomized controlled trials with humans. So we already can have a sense of, hey, this is solid, this is going to be used in the real world. And then we track the science, we track patents, because tracking intellectual property helps you see who is doing what. Like, for example, what Apple or Google or Medtronic or universities are working on. We track investments. So we track revenues. We track press coverage. So basically, what is new in the realm of, we can call it non-invasive neurotechnology or digital health for the brain. And then we do conferences, we produce market reports, we do consulting for companies who want to understand the space and maybe who to partner with or who to buy or how to license different technologies. But through our research, we realized that many people were interested in this for themselves. I'm reading all this news in the media about red wine is good for the brain, or is it bad, or all these games or supplements or whatever it is. And the media does a horrible job to give some context.
Yeah.
It's all press release this week says A, press release next week says the exact opposite, or it sounds the opposite. So we thought, wow, given what we do, we have a much deeper knowledge into what is going on. And why don't we start publishing books to educate the wider public about what is all this new science, how to apply it from a lifestyle perspective in terms of nutrition, in terms of exercise, in terms of stress. And then if someone wants to go beyond and navigate different technologies, well, how to even think of them, not as general solutions or magic pills, which is what many people still expect, either from drugs or from technologies, but as tools in the toolkit. And the same way that, for example, right now, if you go to any kitchen in the US or Europe or developed country, you will have a dishwasher and you will find a washing machine and you will have a fridge and you have a freezer. So there's different tools that people have learned how to use. But if I told you, well, I have this new thing called dishwasher, and the dishwasher is wonderful, it washes things, and then you put your clothes there, that would be a disaster. And then you will say, hey, this dishwasher doesn't work. Well, it works for dishes. If you want to wash your clothes, you have something different called a washing machine. If you put your dishes in the washing machine, that's going to be another disaster. So there's more and more tools. And what we found is that people didn't have the knowledge, the basic vocabulary or concepts of brain and mind to navigate all these different tools and then adopt, if they want, the ones that sound most relevant. And just one more thing, in terms of the context and the book, one thing that helped me a lot, because I was doing this more industry analysis, which is more abstract, is more detached, if you want, from real human beings. You are doing all this analysis, working with these investors, executives. I was invited to teach a class through OLI. It's a network of Osher lifelong learning institutes. So the Osher Foundation and a guy called Bernard Osher, I'm not sure what he did, but he gave a lot of money to universities to create institutes with classes for people over the age of 50. So I taught a class on titled exercising our brains and our minds to people over 50 in UC Berkeley and also San Francisco State University. And I had, I know, maybe 50 to 80 adults over the age of 50. So it was fascinating and super rewarding because I have to realize, well, what do they care about? Mm-hmm. How do I teach? How do I share things in a way that is relevant to them? Mm-hmm. Not some abstract trend, but hey, they're carrying out memory, they're carrying out Alzheimer's, they're carrying out stress. So it was super useful. And through that class that I taught maybe 5-6 years total, came the idea of the book itself. Because often they would ask me, well, what can I read that goes much deeper into what we discuss in the class? And there was nothing like that. There are many, many good books, but typically I tend to be more focused in one topic or one or the other. Mm-hmm. So we thought of the book, it's not a textbook, but that's why we organize it pretty well. We try to think, hey, reading the book should be like coming to this class for 1 month or 2 months. So how would you organize a class? You would say, well, first, let's discuss the basics of the brain and the mind, how it works, what are cognitive biases, what is memory, what is attention. Then let's talk about science and how science works and what's the value of randomized controlled trials and meta-analysis. So the next time you read something in the news, you know how to understand that and not be misled one way or the other. One thing that happens all the time is the media talking about wonderful, whatever random thing is going to cure Alzheimer's. And then you read the actual paper and was done on 10 mice, right? Yeah. Like, well, maybe for mice it's good news, but from mice to humans, it always is a long process. Then in the book, we added chapters on lifestyle. So what are the different factors that people care more about and are more shown to have an impact from physical exercise, what types of physical exercise and why. Mm-hmm. The same with nutrition and supplements, which is a very controversial area. The same with the stress. And the stress is very important because many people know stress is bad, but they don't understand how to regulate that. Then mental stimulation and cognitive stimulation, then technology. And the last chapter, I hope you get to that one because we're very proud of that chapter 9, is, well, how to put it all together. Yeah. Yeah. So think of a jigsaw. And then if you like some pieces of the jigsaw, that's great. But think of what pieces of the jigsaw maybe you are overlooking, because that's maybe where the opportunities for you. So we have many vignettes, many case studies of people in different decades of life and trying to develop that thinking about, hey, there's no magic pill, but I mean, there's things that would make a lot of sense to you personally, based on your lifestyle, based on what you want to do. Mm-hmm. And that was a bit of the spirit of the book.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's, well, first off, I think it's so useful, the idea of SharpBrains and having kind of an intermediary between this scientific community and the general public, because like you said, the media can be very misleading. They're not really incentivized to improve people's health. They're incentivized by their own bottom dollar. So they want catchy headlines and not necessarily to give you the best information.
But even if they were incentivized, they don't have the tools. I mean, they will say that's not our mission. Our mission is to... So, and I run in general, science reporting is very bad. So there's very few resources, and this is a complex area. So it's both, I agree, the incentives, but also is that, I mean, there's so much work to do that the media doesn't have the toolkit to do that.
Yeah. And another thing I just want to go back to as well is the idea of the jigsaw puzzle and taking bits of the formula and implementing them in your life based on your goals and everything. And, I think reading the book, fitness, nutrition, and stress are kind of 3 things that people, I think, are becoming more aware of, has an impact on the brain. I would almost say that has, among my friend group at least, that has gotten to the point of common sense almost, where we all know that we have to eat right, we have to exercise, and having stress is going to affect your memory, your attention, all these things. But I think what was really interesting to me was the views of technology as they impact the brain. And this is something I would like to spend a lot of time on today. And you mentioned Posit Science's Brain HQ.
Before we jump there, can I say one thing about the jigsaw?
Please.
Because one of the key things that people like a lot in the book, and by the way, we publish books through both physical books and Kindle. And in the Kindle, when people highlight, then the publisher can see what is the most. So it's fascinating because we can actually see what most people seem to highlight, which means they are more interested in or more surprised by. And one of the most popular areas is the whole section we have on cognitive biases. And one cognitive bias, which is very powerful, is called the confirmation bias, which is you are always looking for information that confirms what you already believe. So if someone loves to meditate, when they're reading the newspaper, if there's an article that says how wonderful meditation is for the brain, they're going to read that whole article and they're going to share it with 100 people saying, hey, I told you, you see, meditation is great. And then they will ignore the articles that maybe are a bit more critical of meditation, or the ones that are talking about physical exercise, or the ones that are talking about cognitive stimulation. The same way, someone who is an athlete and goes to the gym all the time will read the article about how great physical exercise is good for the brain. We'll share that with the millions of people, and we completely ignore the one talking about meditation.
Right.
So then, given that, that's why we thought of the jigsaw as the framework to force people to get out of that confirmation and only read the chapter they care about and only do the things they already like doing and say, hey, this is great, but you are missing very important parts of the jigsaw puzzle because the mechanisms are complementary. And this is another key concept. And that's why we developed the jigsaw idea, which is, so physical exercise is very important for many reasons. One big one is that it can increase what is called neurogenesis, the creation of new neurons. Now, if those new neurons appear in the brain and you do nothing in the whole day but watching television, doing something passive, nothing active, not thinking, those new neurons are going to die. So just doing more and more physical exercise and nothing else is a waste of effort. I mean, you can do it because you want it. But so what determines where those new neurons survive or die and where they connect in the brain? It is then the role of cognitive exercise. Right. What are you learning that day? So that's complementary and extremely important to think it's not one or the other. They go in tandem. And then stress is another key thing, which is, so you have new neurons, they connect, but you are super, super stressed for long periods of time. And I think stress, I agree and disagree with what you said. People understand stress is important, but they don't understand why and how it works at the physiological level, and that's very important. And that's why we can talk later in the tech area of biofeedback, how I think that's a super useful technology. So you have sustained chronic stress that can reduce that creation of new neurons or even contribute to the death of the neurons you have. So if you do great physical exercise and great cognitive exercise, but you spend the whole day worrying, high stress, and you do nothing about that, it's counterproductive. It's a net loss. Yeah. So you have to think of all these parts of the puzzle, how they complement each other. And I don't think many people still understand that. And then if you want, we can go to the technology or anything else.
No, well, I think that is an important point, because even for myself, as I was kind of going to make the point, is that, nutrition, stress, and physical exercise are things that a lot of my friend group, myself, try to do to maintain a healthy mind and to optimize cognition. But there's also that other part, like you mentioned, where you need to work out that muscle. You need to work out your brain and actually be doing things to address perhaps your shortcomings. And, I'm a big reader. I love reading, read all the time, which is great for the brain. However, there's other mechanisms or processes in the brain that also need attention, which maybe you don't give by doing a bunch of reading or by doing 100 crossword puzzles. So that was where I was going with the Posit Science's Brain HQ. Finding out about that from your book was a mind-opening moment for me, of just being like, if people are going to go to the gym to work out their biceps and get fit, we should be looking at our brain as having specific exercises to do to work out each particular thing. You know, on Posit Science's Brain HQ, they have, memory, attention, interpersonal skills, navigation. These are all things that they've developed specific exercises to address.
It's mostly what is called processing speed.
Right.
So memory, attention can be benefits, but the key thing they train is called processing speed, either auditory or visual. Mm-hmm. Yeah, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt.
No. That's all. That's really the only point I wanted to make was just that I like the analogy that's presented in the book of a gymnasium. Of we need to go to the brain gym, and we need to, there's a squat rack, and that's good. A metaphorical squat rack that's good for your processing speed, and another one that's good for your navigation. And it's how far away from this being ubiquitous in our culture do you think we are from people really looking at their brain as something that they need to spend time developing the separate parts of?
Well, this is the part of the interview where there's already so many things I want to say at the same time. It's a pity we only have one mouse. Okay, so let me try to, and this is called working memory, which is the ability to hold different pieces of information at the same time. So do I answer to that question or to the thought I had before that I think builds into then that question? So first I will answer the question. I think that still will take a while at the population level. What is happening at the general level is that people are getting very, very enthused by one thing, which is great. It is many people are using meditation apps, which is great. Many people are using all these cognitive training exercises, which is great. Other people are focused on nutrition, which is great. I think some people love crossword puzzles, which is great. We can talk about that in a second. So I think that's already a first step. It's like people realizing it's not about genes. It's not about being fatalist. That, well, why should I try anything? Because that's who I am. That's my genes. Everything is in decline. Why bother change everything? So what is a very positive first step is people take more control or try to be more proactive about their mental fitness, brain health, and realizing maybe we still don't know perfectly well what everyone should be doing, but we do have guidelines. And as long as you feel you are doing something and that something is helping you, that's a great first step. And I see that everywhere. So that has been a very positive development in the last 10, 15 years. That second level, and okay, so now realizing the metaphor, hey, if I only do one thing, is great start, but it's not enough. I have to do other things. I mean, I think that will be a natural second level, hopefully soon. We don't know yet when. Where I do see that happening already is more from the rehab perspective. But typically that comes when someone has a therapist or a psychologist or someone actually helping understand, hey, these are your particular weaknesses, maybe after some big problem, and then how you are going to help rehabilitate and develop. So people have more guidance about, well, I need to improve on these 4 things, and then you do that. At the population level, it is not so well understood. But let me, back to your comment, for example, you like reading, and I love reading as well, and it fits into this. So one big thing that we discuss in the chapter on mental exercise is that the 3 key ingredients for good mental exercise are novelty, variety, and a degree of challenge, of effort. So if you spend, let's say, 10 hours a day reading, this is just an example, and you just read the same type of books by the same authors on the same topics, that is not going to be as beneficial as if you read different types of books. If you like fiction, well, maybe you have to read more nonfiction, and vice versa. Or if you like to read, okay, why don't you write a short story or a novel, not because you want to sell it as a bestseller, but just the effort to think, hey, I'm going to write a book, I'm going to write a short story, engages different circuits and different neurons that otherwise would be neglected. So the point is the cross-training. And that's, I think, what we say in the chapter is, think about the brain not as the one, use it or lose it. That's a bit misleading. When people know that use it or lose it, seems to assume there's one it. And that's not correct. The brain is true. It's one system, but has a lot of different circuits supporting very different networks and different functions. So it's very important to approach things in a much more balanced and comprehensive way, which you can do, again, adding novelty, variety, and challenge in many, many different ways. Could be changing what you read, writing more, learning how to dance, learning a foreign language. I mean, this traveling to different places, probably not these days, but the point is, if people understood that it's very simple. Okay, novelty, variety, and challenge, and we can ask why, and then you can implement it in any ways you want. And we also, the point I want to make out crosswords. So the first maybe 100 or 200 crossword puzzles or Sudoku puzzles are excellent. It forces you to pay attention. By doing so, you are training your attention, it improves your working memory, improves many things. But after you've done 10,000 of them, number 2001, the marginal benefit is extremely low. It's more like a routine activity. You do probably without even thinking that much. And you can even see that at the neuroimaging level. So at that point, maybe it's when you have to try to do something completely different. Maybe the Brain HQ program or there's many other programs, or vice versa. If you're obsessed with computer games, and many people are, well, maybe young people should do more crossword puzzles, right? Yeah. Because typically we don't do them. So that's a very important principle.
Yeah. And I think this ties into something else that I found very interesting in the book, which was I wasn't expecting to read a book about brain health and read kind of positive, or I don't know what the exact word to say is, the positive perspective on things like Call of Duty and playing video games. And can you just speak on how that can be positive, certain video games like Call of Duty, and where is that line whenever it becomes a negative?
Yeah. That's a good question. I'm not sure if it was Call of... So there's two different things. So a video game is a mental exercise by definition. And physical as well. You have to move a joystick. And some of them are very visual. So it's a lot of peripheral vision. And there is, I think the scientist who talks a lot about that is called Daphne Bavelier. But she has found, good research that, again, depends on which game can improve particular targeted areas. So if you happen to need those areas, that's going to benefit you. But the game I think that was more interesting, and we discussed those studies in the book, is called Rise of Nations. That I think is one you have to build. I'm not sure if it's a city or an empire or a civilization. And what is very interesting of that game is that the same scientist, Arthur Kramer, had two very different groups of people playing that game. I'm not sure if it was 20, 25 hours in 1 or 2 months. So one group was, I think, college kids, so maybe 20 to 22. The other one was older adults, maybe people in their 60s, 70s. Same game, same amount of time. So what of those two groups would you expect that has seen bigger cognitive benefits by playing, again, same game, same amount of time? Would you guess the younger people or the older ones?
I would probably guess the older people, because it would be a novelty to them. So they're meeting that criteria.
Yeah, and the novelty and the challenge. And for them, the variety, because typically they are not playing those games. They are playing crossword or bingo or Sudoku or whatever you want. So that's why it's very important. So the use of games or any computer exercise can be beneficial or not if it adds those elements of novelty, variety, and challenge. So it has to be compared to whatever you are already doing in your lifestyle. So if you are a college kid, you already have probably a lot of cognitive stimulation coming in, and probably you also play quite often video games. So maybe then the best low-hanging fruit for you would be more physical exercise, or it would be how to regulate stress. And then you could use more meditation, either going to classes or do some of the apps like Calm or Headspace, that in fact they came out after we published the book. So we don't talk too much about meditation apps because that's relatively new, or use biofeedback systems, which we do talk in the book because that technology has been around for a while, which helps you self-monitor your physiological level of stress and how to breathe and how to visualize in a way that helps you self-regulate stress. And that's extremely useful for college to be able to study well and to take the exams well, for athletes. And athletes, in fact, use this very regularly because that's the way to be in the zone and to be focused. And more we see traders. I don't know if you read. Did you read? That was people felt a surprise about that interview because it's like, what's that doing here? Well, that's very relevant, right?
I was very surprised to read that. That was another thing that kind of caught me off guard reading the book was, oh, wow, now we're talking about stock traders and how these brain exercises are helping them be better at their job and regulate their emotions, not make bad decisions, recognize patterns. These are all things that can be trained, right?
Yeah. And this was before the common area, where now it seems there's more and more people opening Robinhood stock. And so we wrote it maybe 5-6 years ago. So now when we update the book and we're working on a new edition, we'll probably have to go deeper into into that aspect of things because there's many more people investing and trading. But so learning how to regulate emotions and stress in particular is extremely important. I do hope in the future we will see all the schools adopting this for kids and frankly as young as possible, because stress is becoming more and more prevalent and we cannot avoid it. I mean, even if we go to live in a temple in the top of a mountain, there will be stress there. So stress in our society, given change, given complexity, given many trends, is going to be, we can harness it for good or for bad. And many people, even if they understand at the intellectual level, stress is bad, they don't have, first, the knowledge that stress management is a practice. It's not a knowledge, it's a practice that you need to practice. And second, what practices make more sense? And I've talked about meditation many times in this interview. Again, and that's one interesting thing that has mindfulness or different types of meditation. More and more people understand that. With biofeedback, which is another very proven technique, I've been surprised. Frankly, it's so obvious. And some of the devices used to cost thousands of dollars now are becoming super cheap, like $80, $100. You can have a good system. People still don't use them because I guess they don't know how they work or what to use them for. The same thing for cognitive training. I mean, I know more and more there's even more esoteric devices, like you can send light through your nostrils and somehow that goes to the brain. Or people are using TVCS, which is transcranial magnetic stimulation. Could be useful, could be very bad, depends on how you use it. So there's an explosion of new tools and new technologies, but most people haven't taken the time to go through the basics. And earlier you said that it was very useful to have someone like SharpBrains trying to help put all this together. But that's what our role is sometimes very frustrating because everyone is contacting us with, don't tell me all this, blah, blah, blah. Don't have me read a book. Don't tell me go to a course. Just tell me what I should buy tomorrow. You're like, well, depends. What do you want? I mean, let's go to all these steps and then maybe you can use this or use that. But people sometimes are willing to either do nothing or only do the thing they want to do anyway, or jump into the most random thing possible. It's like, well, this is a big opportunity. We harness it well. For that, we need more consumer education. And that's I'm part of many task forces in different groups and associations. What's the future of mental health technology? What's the future of new technology? And more I see, there's many people in governments, in academia, starting to notice, there's all these new technologies, all these new apps. And from their perspective, which I understand, they're super worried that many of them are not FDA clear and FDA approved. And that's the way they often see things. It's like, well, any new thing in medicine has to be FDA approved. That's the only way. But again, many of these things are non-invasive and they are completely safe. So it's not, and they don't make claims like we're going to treat ADHD. So it's not going to be, and some companies, that's the industry called digital therapeutics, are going that way, FDA. But some of them are more loose, are more, again, a meditation app. There's no way you can ask a meditation app to go through the FDA process before it markets itself. So there's an explosion of apps. People in governments and academia and the medical establishment are getting worried. And what is going to be, I think, very interesting how it happens next few years is how those apps are rated. So more ratings. Something like consumer reports. When you're going to buy a new car, or a new washing machine, or a new fridge, well, you can go. First of all, you have to know what is a car or what is a washing machine. But then, you can understand there's some criteria, and you see there's some resource that rates different apps for different priority. So there's more and more interest in that idea of, hey, let's have a resource, a clearinghouse, to evaluate independently and rate all these different apps. And that way help consumers and even doctors navigate what apps to buy or not and why. But the problem with ratings, and we have asked to develop those many times, the problem with apps with ratings is that if people don't know what the app is supposed to do, the rating itself is never going to be enough. So, for example, we have talked about positive science. That's one example because it had good science in the beginning. So if I rate it as, hey, does it have good clinical trials? I would have to say yes, that's very high. But maybe what it does is, again, it's processing speed. But if you want working memory, maybe you should use Cogmed or any other completely different app. So if you want to regulate stress, that's a whole different area. So I think those rating systems are going to be very useful to educate consumers, but nothing is going to replace the fact that consumers will have to get smarter about all this area of science. And books are a very traditional technology. It's a technology. Or YouTube classes or videos. I think consumer education is going to be extremely important for all this new industry and science to be applied in a useful way.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think there's also, you kind of alluded to it before, there seems to be a gap in just methods of assessment for a person, the average person. How do they find out where they need work to then narrow down their search for the right tool? Is there a way that people can take some sort of assessment or have someone review their performance through certain tasks to give them a blueprint of what they should be doing?
So that's a beautiful question. So since the beginning, we tracked two different things. Well, we're having talking about interventions. What can we do, either from a lifestyle perspective of technologies to improve anything? But at the same time, we also were tracking and analyzing the field of assessments because we thought, hey, over time, those two are going to match, are going to come together. So maybe you have an assessment, and the assessment is going to help in two ways. One, to have like a baseline, and then you can assess yourself maybe every year, and you can see what improves, what gets worse. Similar to an annual physical checkup, like an annual brain checkup. And by the way, people, when we ask surveys, people love this idea. People are desperate to do that. Doctors and public governments hate the idea because they think that's going to lead to a lot of false diagnostics and false knowledge. So it's going to be very interesting to see actually what happens. So the assessments are very useful from the baseline perspective, from a diagnostic perspective. Say, for example, Alzheimer's. So the way Alzheimer's is diagnosed today is a disaster. It makes absolutely no sense, even at a basic level. So imagine I take you a typical assessment with a doctor, and then takes maybe 20, 30 minutes, and I'm comparing your cognitive performance in that test to people, maybe in your age group, at your education level. So I'm comparing you with the norm. And then I say, no, you are completely fine, so bye-bye. Have a nice day. Okay. But maybe you now are above or at your norm, but maybe last year you were way higher. Maybe you could have, because all your life you have done many more physical and mental exercise, or genetically you were. So they don't see the decline. And the decline is what would help detect, wow, this is concerning. Even if you are at the average, you used to be way higher. So many people who are above average at the cognitive level are completely misdiagnosed. They are not diagnosed. They should be diagnosed. They should be treated, but nothing is happening. If there was that baseline, and then you could track yourself over time, or the doctor could track you over time, this will become much more obvious. Or even another big problem, especially in the US, is with people as they get older, they take more and more medicaments. And medicaments are tested for safety, typically at the physical level, but there's very little knowledge about what's the cognitive impact of typical medicaments. So what happens is that many people take drugs for whatever. It can be diabetes, can be anything else you want, and that makes them lose memory, lose attention, they get frustrated. So it has a lot of mental negative side effects, and they have no way to prove that to a doctor, and the doctor has no way to see that. So if there was this, but pharma companies, to their credit, are starting to realize this opportunity. If we had some kind of cognitive assessment that people take before they take the drug, and then they take the medicament, that way the doctor can monitor the cognitive effects of that medication. And if there is some red flag, well, maybe change the dose or change the medication. Anyway, long story short, but assessments are going to be extremely useful just as assessments to track that baseline. Second, for the diagnosis, as we just described, and we can go deeper. And third, back to your question is, well, once we have an assessment, if we want to do it deeper and more comprehensive, then maybe we can detect particular weaknesses that maybe can match into what intervention or interventions may make more sense for you. So that doesn't still exist today. It's going to take a while to develop. The closest to this framework is what neuropsychologists do. But neuropsychologists typically help people who have severe problems, either a concussion or Parkinson's or trauma, and then they do very expensive and takes many, many hours to do a good evaluation, and then they try to help rehabilitation. But I mean, there's going to be a way to automate all that. Maybe not for the same patients, but for many people who right now have no access whatsoever to something like that, because again, it's too expensive and too specialized. So the value of technology and data analytics and machine learning and all these things is going to be that once data is captured, we can analyze it better, and then maybe see what are the digital signatures that, we can talk about that in a second, help predict either problems or response to interventions. So for example, in that area, it's called digital biomarkers. And there are some companies, very credible companies, doing very interesting work saying, well, there's different ways to gather data from people. One can be even their smartphone use. There's a variable called typing cadence. So how quickly and accurately you type. If someone is using the smartphone or a keyboard at a certain baseline, and then suddenly the accuracy and the speed declines significantly, that itself is not a diagnostic, but it's a significant red flag that means something. So again, either the person or the doctor can analyze that. So there's sort of interest now and work on digital biomarkers, or we can have some EEG, like let's read brain waves of a particular person in a particular reading that helps us predict whether that person, if he or she is depressed, is more likely to respond to a depressant A or depressant B, or to cognitive behavioral therapy, which is another methodology, or to biofeedback. So there's a huge amount of interest in all these different areas of technology. Again, and the vision in the future will be that those areas are better connected, and one thing leads to the next, but that things take a while. So nothing is so well integrated so far.
Still a lot to figure out, it seems like.
Yeah. So at the individual level, that's a bit tricky. That's why we want to pay attention to the basics first, and then maybe you do the technology. And even if you want to jump into a technology, go into something that is tested and you use it well. And if that doesn't work, then maybe you want to be more experimental. You can go to something else, but don't jump all the way there when maybe there's more obvious opportunities that you could benefit from. There is one from a consumer perspective, I think it's still on. There's a website, up in Canada, there's something called Bakerest. So Bakerest is in Toronto. It's a hybrid of hospital and university, and they invested quite a lot of money in the last 10 years to develop and commercialize a number of technologies for cognitive health. And I mention it because one of the first ones is called Cognicity, And it's a website where people, I think in theory, it's people over 55 can take a maybe 20-minute cognitive assessment online. And then the result is the website tells them back, yeah, don't worry, you're in your range based on your age and education level, which again, as I mentioned before,
Yeah, that's
is
the
not
same
perfect,
problem. Yeah.
but still is something. Or hey, we detect the potential red flag. Maybe you should go and visit your doctor. So there's not too many assessments offered right now credible to the general public. There's many offered through clinicians and for clinicians to automate a lot of what they do. So meaning at some point, all these things offered to clinicians being fully online are going to be offered to consumers. But it takes a while to be able to be offered in a credible way. And also for people, the challenge, some of these things is who's going to pay for what. Often people themselves don't want to pay for a good assessment. So even imagine now that I told you, I have the perfect assessment that helps you identify your strengths, your weaknesses, if you have any problem, and maybe identify what you may benefit from. Well, to make that work, you should be willing to pay something, right? I would say, hey, it costs $70 or whatever. Most people, frankly, pay nothing, zero for assessments. So there's very little incentive as well. Back to your previous word about developing and commercialize and offering to the public good assessments when people are having condition to expect assessments, either they are paid by insurance companies or the doctor, or they are free. So there's some complex things going on. But I agree that one of another dream, earlier I said I would want to see schools adopt these things, maybe to have their own class. Now we have math, we have geography, we have history, we have science. Maybe it should be like mental hygiene or mental fitness or whatever it is. So that was one idea. Hopefully in the future that happens. The other that maybe feeds into this is, well, everyone looks in yourself in the mirror at some point in the day, right? I'm sure you have. I know I have. Every single day we see after the shower, we come, we get ready. Okay. So we know more or less how our body is doing. If I'm becoming overfat, well, the mirror is the assessment of, is helping me realize I'm gaining weight, I'm losing weight, or anything else I want to see. Maybe in the future, that same mirror will be like a smart mirror, and it will project in a corner of the mirror some metrics of your mental health and your brain health that maybe come from an analysis of how you use your computer the previous day, or even a reading of maybe your comb, as you touch your comb, is reading your stress level. So there's a number of things there that helps you automatically get a reading of your general brain and mental health. And maybe that then populates automatically some suggestions for the day. Maybe today you need more coffee, or maybe today you need less coffee, or maybe before you go work, you should take a 50-minute run in the treadmill or out there to be in the right shape. So I think that we're going to see super interesting things. At the industry level, I know that again, we track close to 300 companies doing different things in the world. So we see all these exciting things happening at the company level. At the patents is even more interesting, because to do a patent, you can just imagine whatever you want. So there are things that often don't even still exist. So there's all these new exciting things going on. But then I go back to the idea of the book. It's, well, if people don't have the basic knowledge about the brain and mind and cognition and science and all these different things, they're going to feel completely overwhelmed by this wave of innovation. There's going to be many bad uses of these technologies. So we have to make sure that there's good technologies, that there's good regulation of those technologies. And that's something else that is very interesting. Now in the US, and for digital health, the FDA, starting maybe 3-4 years ago, has been super smart in offering not only the stick of, well, if you make claims that are not right, we will find you and we'll take you off market, but also the carrot, which is if you are a company that are doing serious science and serious trials and are going through this channel, we will expedite approval of future products and technologies. So some companies are benefiting from that. So, but we need to improve regulation. We need to improve consumer education. We have to improve the consumer ratings idea. We have to improve diagnostics, as we discussed, and assessments. So anyway, so it's going to be a super, super interesting field to watch.
Yeah. The assessment that you mentioned was cognicity. Is that right? Correct. So I will make sure to link to that in the notes for this episode if anyone's curious to take it. I believe that our mutual contact, Barbara Aerosmith-Young, actually has an assessment on her website as well that you can take a questionnaire. I have not taken it, but I believe she does. So I will make sure to link to those in the notes for people.
Yeah. But let's talk about Barbara for a second.
Yeah, let's do that.
Because obviously you have talked about her. You had a whole podcast with her. She's an amazing person, right?
Yeah.
A living proof of many things we have discussed. And what's the name of? Norman Deutsch. Mm-hmm. So Norman Deutsch, he wrote a great book called The Brain That Changes Itself, maybe already 10 years ago, I'm guessing, or maybe even more than that. And it was probably the first super successful book talking about neuroplasticity. That was very beneficial for people to realize, wow, again, it's not all genes, it's not aging, there's many things I can do. So I hope there's more and more knowledge about that. But even today, when we do surveys or research, many people still are very fatalist. They think, again, it's genes, I cannot do anything because I'm too old, or I'm fixed. Again, back to Barbara, that's not so much about age, it's about learning difficulties, right? Mm-hmm. The typical framework is we can only accommodate your difficulties.
Right.
And that's the typical framework and how schools are architected these days. But what she's trying to do is, sure, accommodation, fine, why not? That's important. But if we could even, not so much fix, because the word fix assumes a binary, but you can mitigate the problems or you can improve some strengths. That makes a lot of sense. And I hope more schools, within the school itself. So Barbara and Aerosmith is a separate line of schools, typically for a particular segment of kids. But that methodology, that way of thinking, even if it's that methodology or a different methodology, should be applied everywhere.
Right. It's the difference between having kids memorize facts or information about a topic versus having them learn how to use their brain and improving weaknesses. We all have weaknesses in the way we think and the way our brain works that can be addressed. And Barbara is living proof of that. I wonder what is holding us back from, you mentioned for children who have maybe a learning difficulty, the goal in school is to change the environment to better suit that difficulty as opposed to addressing the difficulty itself. But that's not the same view we have with someone being overweight. Someone being overweight, we know that we can adjust their diet, we can change their habits, we can encourage them to exercise more. How far, what needs to happen for us to switch the way we view the mind and certain things like this?
I like the emphasis on social emotional learning as an example of that direction, which I think is positive. I think the content often could be much improved, but I think at least it's a first step. There's more interest there. And we're talking about mainstream education. From the point of view of, and by the way, and I don't like labels like learning difficulties because they seem to assume, I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about in general.
Okay.
That because they seem to assume, hey, it's only this segment of kids who have learning difficulties, when the fact is we all, 100% of children and adults have learning difficulties in some areas. So we can all benefit from doing something to improve our strengths and mitigate or address our weaknesses. And it's not a binary as everyone, like 80% of people should just ignore all this and only 20% of people should focus on this. No, that's the starting point. Is everyone can benefit from this. And again, I do not see many signs other than that social emotional learning that people are taking that seriously at the mainstream level. Some companies, some countries, for example, in the UK, there's been very interesting research. For example, they test kids' working memory. I'm not sure if it's at the middle school level. And for the kids that have low working memory and are struggling in math, which is typical, they recommend working memory training. Because to that subset of people, working memory training above a certain threshold is probably translate into better math, which is very smart and it makes a lot of sense, rather than ignoring the cognitive aspect of things and just telling kids to, well, you just have to do more math. But if the kid is not equipped to deal with math, to think of different elements, to combine them, just doing more math is not going to help at all. So I do see some, at the mainstream level, some interesting things. I like, again, the emphasis on mindfulness, meditation. I'm surprised how schools don't use more biofeedback, because that would be the most obvious thing. But let me mention something super interesting. So maybe in the beginning of SharpBrains, I was helping a couple of nonprofits to better understand the research and how to bring things to market. One is called the Institute of Heart Math. It's in California, it's in the Bay Area, and they were one of the early pioneers of biofeedback for stress regulation. And at some point, they got a very significant grant from the Department of Education to evaluate whether their methodology could be adopted in the schools and result in better overall grades. They did this study. I don't remember the specifics, like how many kids, but it was pretty massive. It was a solid study. And the output, the result from the Department of Education perspective was negative, meaning, sorry, this is not something we're going to recommend wide adoption. But the interesting part comes now, which is, okay, so let's understand what happened. So if you broke things, the results by gender, by either male or female, there was huge disparity. So girls benefited a lot from this methodology in ways that translated into much better math, and I'm not sure what other results there were involved. Versus boys, they, on average, didn't seem to benefit at all. So at the aggregate level, the Department of Education says, sorry, we cannot sponsor or support this, which is a tragedy. It's like, excuse me, you found something that on average 50% of the population can improve a lot. Let's find a way to help them in the school, at home, in whatever capacity. So, but I mention it because part of the problem in this is that many of these technologies are going to have to be personalized. They're not going to benefit everyone the same way. And right now, the delivery system we have of schooling is same for everyone or nothing at all, which is a completely broken way to see that. So that's what's preventing a lot of this thing. Now, if we talk about learning disabilities or difficulties or special needs or that, I mean, that's even more complex because just general inertia. When you have a wide establishment that sees things one way, has been trained to see things one way, has a job because of doing things one way, it takes a long time to change that industry, that set of practices. And that's why Barbara had to set up a separate set of schools to show. And hopefully, after showing the results, she's showing, and all these schools are showing, well, little by little, then maybe charter schools or private schools, or at some point, some public schools in some states or countries will start to adopt that innovation. But it's very complex.
Yeah, and it almost comes down to at the teacher level, I feel like, and just having teachers begin to recognize the value in it on a personal, individual level and implement it in their classrooms. And from there, maybe that faculty starts to see, oh, what Mrs. Jones is doing in fourth grade is her grades are picking up. What can we implement from her program? And then it spreads that way instead of coming from a top-down approach.
The problem with that is that, teachers already have so many other things going on.
Yeah.
And if you are teaching 20 kids or 25 or 30 or whatever it is, you don't have the tools or the time to truly personalize. So some good teachers will do that a little bit, and that will be good enough that you see results and what you see. But I think this is going to happen first, it's more scalable if it comes from parents, if it comes from families. So if it is, and frankly, and that's the key thing now, because the government, they have also many other things going on, the education department, there's many things going on. So I think parents are the ones who have to say, hey, we're going to send our kids to the schools where we think they're going to benefit the most. And so that's why, things like school choice, that sometimes is very political and very controversial, but I think parents should be empowered because they're the ones who in the end care more about our children and can make tough decisions. So the more and more that parents send their kids to schools that are doing a good job here, in those schools, we have more resources. They will be able to grow, to expand. The schools that don't, well, it will happen the opposite. Then if some schools grow and grow and grow because more parents want to go there, then maybe someone at the regional level or the country level will say, oh, this is working. Why don't we replicate this methodology in different cities or in different, or some foundation will help that. So I think parents is going to be the main vehicle for change in terms of kids and learning difficulties.
Yeah, that makes sense to me, Alvaro. All right. We've covered some good ground in terms of things that people can take away to go and do themselves. I think we mentioned assessments, looking at brain, specific training for specific functions of the brain. You've mentioned biofeedback technology a couple times. Can you maybe, recommend or go into some good products that you would recommend that I can link to, and why they're good?
So first I have to be careful. We don't recommend particular products because we track hundreds of them. So I have to be careful not to be seen as
what do the studies support?
No, but I can, for example, I'm happy to say, and in fact in the book there's one that we mentioned that even today probably is the most reliable, is by that institute I mentioned of HeartMath, and the product is called M-Wave. And there are different sensors. Some sensors can be in your earlobe or it can be in your fingertip. But before we can go more about products, but let's step back for a second. So, because stress and biofeedback are things that people don't understand the link very well. There's one very fun book, maybe you have read it, called Why Zebras Don't Have Ulcers.
I have not, but it was mentioned in your book.
It's amazing. It's by a guy called Robert Sapolsky, amazing scientist and guy. But the key idea is, like zebras, we are mammals. So we have the same kind of physiological stress response. If a zebra is in the wild and suddenly there is a lion approaching her only priority in life for the next 5 minutes is to run for her life, right? So the lion doesn't catch her. So in that moment, all her, let's call it long-term projects shut down because they don't matter. It's a survival. So there's no creation of new neurons. There's no digestion. There's many things. All the body, all the energy goes to her cardiovascular system to run, and to her legs to run literally for her life. So after 5 minutes, there's two potential outcomes. One, either the lion has captured her and then eats her. So the number of neurons and digestion doesn't matter that much. Yeah. Or in 5 minutes, she has escaped and then she goes back to normal. So she goes back to the physiological state of more rest and calm, where those long-term processes can resume and continue. We humans don't do that very well. We stay stressed for days and weeks and months. We even see lions that don't even exist. So first, we see imaginary lions. Second, even if it was a real lion, after we escaped, we don't know how to go back to that calm state. And that's where biofeedback is a useful tool, to be better aware first of, what's my current physiological state? Am I calm? Am I in my zone? Or am I super stressed? Am I angry? And second, what kind of meditation or breathing techniques or visualizing techniques can help me go back to that zone? So just to give you an example, first I used these devices. And there are games that come with this, but I was thinking of my most stressful boss, the one that was making my life miserable. And I could see in the biofeedback how my stress level spiked just by thinking of that. So then I had to apply these techniques and see in how many seconds can I come back to a more neutral state. So that's what biofeedback is so useful for, at least for people who like metrics and who
Yeah.
like technology.
Was that a heart
Because
rate? A heart rate that you were
it's called heart
monitoring?
rate variability.
Right. Okay.
So heart rate itself is not enough for what I'm talking, but heart rate variability, the pattern of change of heart rate, is the best measure of are you are you calm in a good state, or are you completely off balance. So that industry, because frankly, from the consumer side, so many coaches and many athletes and some psychologists use this. So professionals use technology like this, but consumers typically don't know what to do with this, don't use it. There's not such a mature industry. So I can mention some products or some companies, but still they're relatively small. The products sometimes they're not perfectly user friendly. They're a bit so it's a bit more experimental at this point. But one again, I mentioned M-Wave, and I can send you later. But it's the one I mentioned in the book. There is a new company. There used to be a game that failed, but the game itself was very good. And then a company called Unite Technologies, but Unite, is a Y, UNYTE Technologies. They're trying to resurrect. It's a very fun game that is based on biofeedback. So to win points and to accomplish tasks in the game, you have to learn how to regulate your physiological stress. And then, biofeedback is general. And then neurofeedback or EEG feedback is much more specific. So in that type of biofeedback, which is more specific, there's many companies, but I can mention two of them. Again, I don't say I recommend everyone uses them, but take a look. One more for practitioners and researchers is called Emotiv, EMOTIV. They have relatively cheap equipment that reads brainwaves pretty well, and you can learn a lot through just analyzing that. It's not at the consumer level. They had a Kickstarter campaign that worked pretty well, but then there were some manufacturing problems, and then people didn't know what to do with these devices. So the whole thing they still are now more focused on a professional market. The other company, the company is called Interaction, and the product is called Muse, MUSE. And then Muse is like a headband that is very simple. Again, in theory, to have good brainwave reading, you need many sensors. So the challenge is that you have many sensors, no one is going to wear a whole helmet. And there's a complexity of, is it wet? Do you have to, or can it be dry? But Muse is the first maybe consumer-friendly device that is based on biofeedback approaches that can be, I think, good enough for most people who like technology to learn maybe how to self-regulate thoughts, self-regulate emotions, applying these processes of, again, visualizing. You still have to do something. It's not you put it and then it's solved. It's still, but it offers the feedback loop. It offers the analytics that you can see, hey, am I doing it well? Am I improving or I am not? And that helps many people, again, who don't have the luxury of, I'm going to spend 3 months in the Himalayas learning with Zen monks how to meditate. Well, if you have that, maybe that's the best approach. But if you just need something that you can apply, maybe 1 or 2 hours a week, and maybe hopefully see some results in 3-4 weeks, equipment like this can be useful.
Yeah. I don't know if you golf or not, but they have some equipment that reminds me of this, where you can, put something on your golf club, practice your swing. You're not actually hitting a ball or anything, and it will tell you, the angle of your speed, the angle of your swing, the club head speed, and from there you can make adjustments, see what works, see what didn't. So it's kind of this. But I guess one major hurdle, like we were talking about before, to the biofeedback arena is consumer knowledge and education, because you kind of need that to scale along with what consumers know, right?
But that reminds me of something. This is a regular Samsung. This is relatively new, but the Samsungs I had for maybe 10 years, the sensor itself, you can use them as a heart rate variability sensor. So you don't even need to buy all these things. If you know what you're doing, you just use them and you apply the breathing and you apply the visualizing, and you can self-regulate and see there. I'm not sure if the last iPhones have it. For a while, they have heart rate, but again, that's not heart rate variability. But back to your point, is consumer knowledge.
Yeah.
Is, again, you can buy something that is relatively inexpensive, or you can even use it there. But if you don't know what to do with it or even why, that's the main bottleneck. That's the main problem.
Yeah. Yeah, and for people who are interested in looking at these types of products or games, I mean, your book does a great job in the end of putting together data that was contributed to by newsletter subscribers. They were self-reported their experience with certain things, but outside of organizations like yourself that are doing work to aggregate data like this, what steps should someone be taking to evaluate a potential product or game or anything? What should they be looking at before they spend their money?
Okay, that's a good question. Before that, back to your point of golf. In fact, golfers are one of the areas where they use a lot of biofeedback. Mm-hmm. Because to play golf well, you have to be truly focused and calm and not let random thoughts bother you, because then you are going to notice. So yeah. Golfers are the one. It still is not embedded in the golf, but in the stick itself. But maybe in the future it will be. Yeah. Imagine when you grab it, it can sense if you are too stressed, and then it has like a red light.
Yeah.
Say, hey, no.
Or vibrates, so you can't.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, and the same with email. Maybe next time you're going to write an angry email, either the computer detects your stress level because you are touching it, so you can measure it, or just by the content of your email, and then suggest, hey, maybe take 5 seconds to breathe, to meditate, to think something positive before you type. And again, and you can even measure it. You could even close down the computer and say, you will have no use of this computer until you touch this area, like it's a fingerprint, but you are in the right mental state.
That sounds like something that Twitter needs to implement.
That's going to be, but it's technically completely possible.
Yeah.
The problem there is that some people will even throw the computer away, right? But no, it's going to be super interesting. That's different thing, more human-machine interface, and it's going to be super, super interesting. Now, back to your previous point, there's so many things that people can do. One, I'm not trained as a scientist. Mm-hmm. But one thing I had to do, back to the reading point earlier, is to read a lot of studies. So one thing I would recommend is whenever you read something in the newspapers, interesting study, proves, whatever, try to get that paper itself and read it for yourself. You will learn a lot about science, you will learn a lot about the brain, you will learn about whether that is relevant for you. Many studies these days are in the public domain. There's a website called PubMed, like Publications in Medicine, PubMed. There's Google Scholar, but there typically you can track any science mentioned in any newspaper or magazine. And then, I guess by this, typically we see, easily close to half of everything we see is already in the public, is open. Everyone can access that. So read more. Real science is very readable. At least the abstract. The abstract, you can read it. You can go deeper. It's super, super useful. And by the way, in SharpBrains, in our website, this is what we typically do. When we see some interesting article in the news, sometimes they don't even mention what is the paper that justifies the article. So we try to find it, and we publish a brief note that says, this is the article, this is the particular study. So if people want to read it, and then we say news in context. We tend to link to similar or different articles so people can understand the news in context, without which it's impossible to make any good decision. So back to your question. One, again, is biased, but if people don't read a book and understand everything we're talking about, it's going to be a miracle that they make a good decision. So first, I would say, again, biased, but that's why we do it, read the book.
Yeah.
Second is get more access to science. Third is, if you're interested in a particular technology that maybe you saw in the news or a friend has told you, I think there's maybe two different levels of analysis. One is, okay, what technology is it based on? Is it neurofeedback? Is it EEG? Is it transcranial magnetic stimulation? Is it cognitive training? Is it meditation? So you can go to maybe PubMed, the website I mentioned, and search for that particular methodology. And that you can see, hey, does it seem credible? Does it seem like a joke? Because there's a lot of things that I mean, one, I had so many fascinating experiences with all kind of interviews. So a few years ago, I was interviewed. I won't mention name or outlet or anything. And then the interviewer was obsessed on what's my opinion on coconut oil. He was coconut oil for the brain, but truly obsessed, asking me really and say, well, we can talk about nutrition, we can talk about Mediterranean diet. We have not seen any evidence whatsoever that coconut oil has any benefit for Alzheimer's. She was completely irate when I say that, but we had a doctor last week who said it was the most single important thing. So okay, so then, well, fine, go to PubMed and then look for coconut oil, Alzheimer's. And then you will see, are there 10, 20 credible studies? Well, there's something to consider, or there is zero, then it should make you a bit suspicious, right? Mm-hmm. So one is at the category level, and then you can go at the more specific level, which is, okay, not only the category, but maybe you're thinking of this particular product. So for that product, I mean, you can go to the website of that product or app and see what specific studies have used that product. And that's a very tricky area because sometimes some websites have a lot of studies, they look amazing, but they have not used that product. Mm-hmm. So you have to make sure the study has been tested and validated for that product. And you can see it, I mean, typically you can see it in the website itself, or again, you have to go to PubMed and search, okay, this particular product and see if something comes. But in the end, again, it's not perfect science. Mm-hmm. So it is, in the end, okay, you have decided to buy something, which is great. Again, as long as it's not harmful, I think it's completely legitimate to try anything you want. Just figure out an independent way to assess if you see any benefits. Mm-hmm. Don't use it within the product itself, because of course, if you use something, you just become better at that. So for example, if you want to improve your memory and you buy something for your memory, well, try yourself, develop your a memory task that maybe you can do daily for a month. It could be very simple, like, hey, I'm going to generate 10 random words. Let's see if I can remember in 10 seconds, I'm going to remember 10 words or 20 or whatever it is. And then every day you self-evaluate if whatever that you are doing, whatever intervention it is, whatever, well, you see this independent study, this independent self-assessment, and see if that has any benefit. But you have to or you ask your partner, or you ask someone else after a while, hey, do you notice different? Maybe it's even subjective. I know I'm feeling better. Well, that itself has benefits. Yeah. We haven't talked about the placebo effect. And we know that the placebo effect is very important. Just the belief that something is going to help you, that itself helps you. So I always say, well, first of all, you should do your research to choose whatever you think is rationally, scientifically, the most likely to help you. But once you have decided, give it the benefit of the placebo effect. Yeah. At least even maximize.
Believe it,
think it's going to help you, think it has a good chance, because you approach it by, this is not going to help me. You're not even giving a chance. The placebo effect works both ways. So maximize the placebo effect by choosing things that are based on the best science, the best practices that make sense, that are according to the guidelines. We have been talking, and there's much more guidelines. And then again, give it a chance and maximize the placebo effect, because that itself is way better than doing nothing, which is a typical alternative.
Yeah. And you should be seeing the benefits of your practice or your purchase in areas outside of using the purchase. I think you mentioned that, but I think that's important to stress. Like if you're doing memory exercises every day, but you still can't remember the names that your partner is telling you, then is that thing actually working? And so you need to see those improvements elsewhere.
Or you are the golfer, and you're going to learn how to use this biofeedback to relax. Does it transfer into a better golf game?
Exactly.
Or whatever it is. Yeah. So you should see the evaluation outside of the intervention itself.
Right. Well, is there anything that you feel like we missed that you were hoping we would cover that you want to end on? Anything on your heart?
I think there's so many things. Yeah, but this has been great.
Yeah, I had a great time.
Continue for 3 months. But no, I think I think that has been a great introduction and discussion of everything. is there something important in your that you have to get right now? I have a couple of minutes. You want? Is there something missing? Is there something?
Well, let's just finish on this. Supplements.
Okay.
So what does the current science say about supplements? Is there evidence that there's something people can take that does help? Or is it more so of you need to take steps in your activity that is really going to help? What's that relation there?
Yep. So as a general rule, general nutrition is very beneficial, and the so-called Mediterranean diet is the one that has clearly more benefits, and everyone knows what that means, like the fish, the fruit, the vegetables. That does have a very significant improvement. Supplements, for many reasons, this is very complex, especially in the US, because the way supplements are regulated is an absolute disaster. So it is, even not only do they work or do they not work, do they even contain what they are supposed to contain or not? But even assuming they contain what they are supposed to contain. So the general principle is that supplements are very targeted, meaning, and only help if you have a particular deficiency. So if you are a person, frankly, right now, for example, many people have spent a year or many months being mostly indoors. In many states or countries, you cannot spend time outdoors. Well, then clearly that's going to lead to vitamin D deficiency. So then taking vitamin D supplements is likely, and it's not proven, but it's likely. It makes a lot of sense that it is beneficial, and because it's addressing a given deficiency. So, and that's the general rule. If you have a particular reason to believe, given my lifestyle, given my nutrition, I have a particular deficiency in something, and ideally you work with the doctor or the nutritionist to tell you, hey, you need this, or folic acid if you are pregnant, right? There's a number of very clear reasons to take supplements. That makes sense. But the way most people take supplements makes absolutely no sense and can be even counterproductive. So just take a lot of stuff, just in case it helps, and hoping it helps, and then neglecting the other things that are much more likely to really make an improvement. That makes absolutely no sense. So in the US, again, because the way, either from a marketing perspective or from a regulatory perspective, things have evolved, we see people way overtaking supplements compared to what really would bring them benefits, and under doing the many, many other things that we have been discussing. I'm not saying I'm against supplements. Again, if you know what is your efficiency or what is your cause for taking it, do it. But even if you do it, for that reason, don't neglect all the other things that are going to have even a bigger impact than the supplement.
Yeah, so it sounds like the best way to address this is start with the nutrition, start with the exercise, start with the fitness, and then if there's a deficiency still, then...
And in terms of nutrition, in that chapter, we go much deeper into, typical questions we get are, well, is coffee good or bad? Well, good news is that long-term, it doesn't seem to be either good or bad. So you can keep drinking coffee. As long as you don't have 50, maybe that would be bad. If you take 50 for other reasons, but it's not bad. The same with alcohol. So alcohol in moderation, which typically means one or two, whatever it is, beer, wine a day, long-term doesn't have to be either good or bad impact. So be careful, be moderation. Nutrition, we discuss in the book, is more important than supplements or no supplements, is don't eat too many processed fruits. Don't eat too much sugar, because processed fruits, that for many reasons gives you like a short-term rush, and then long-term has negative consequences. So avoid processed foods. Maybe that would be, from a nutrition perspective, the single most important advice or thing to consider, more than supplements or more than any esoteric diets that people may want to follow.
Cool. Well, thank you very
Excellent.
much, Alvaro.
A pleasure.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. And if you've made it this far in the interview, you're likely very interested. So go check out the show notes for this episode to find the SharpBrains Guide to Brain Fitness and links to SharpBrains online, as well as links to other stuff we talked about here.
Thank you so much, Eric.
Thank you. Had a great time.
See you.
Bye.